Hello, this is Michelle Spoonmore, doctoral student in Advanced Studies in Data-Driven Models of Inquiry. I'm going to share with you my research related to teacher feedback. For our class project, I focused on feedback received by teachers from administrators and peers, as well as feedback provided by teachers to the students. In my experience, it seems that everyone has a different response to feedback and how it applies to their personal growth. Yet there is no denying that feedback can be a powerful tool in education. One might wonder if teachers who find value in feedback from administrators and peers also provide more feedback to their students. This study seeks to determine if there is a connection between teachers' attitude towards their own feedback and the feedback that they provide to students. When I reflect upon my own professional career in education, I think about the different forms of feedback that I have received from a wide variety of administrators, mentors, peers, and even students. And I reflect on how my receptivity, my reflection, and my use of that feedback has changed over time. Through the years, I've learned the value of feedback, and just as feedback helps to improve my own teaching practice, I find it important to provide ongoing feedback to students for their improved learning. In my recent experience, teachers have asked for and appreciated ongoing feedback from peers and administrators. Like myself, I serve as an academic dean, yet they have not really articulated or demonstrated a connection between the feedback that they value for their own personal growth and the feedback that they could potentially be providing to students for improved learning. The significance of this study is to determine if there is a relationship between those two practices of feedback. Specifically, do teachers who provide frequent and immediate feedback to students have a more positive attitude towards receiving feedback related to their own practice? Hattie and Temperley claim feedback has no effect in a vacuum. To be powerful in its effect, there must be a learning context to which feedback is addressed. It is but part of the teaching process, and it is that which happens second, after a student has responded to initial instruction, when information is provided regarding some aspect of the student's task performance. They describe feedback as a means to feed up, feed back, and feed forward. Using this framework of feedback, the recipient, whether it is teacher or student, should use feedback to determine where am I going, how am I going, and where am I going to next. The cyclical nature forces the learner to maximize the feedback. Researchers claim the effect of feedback is a powerful tool and can lead to significant gains in learning. For teachers and students, feedback provides a path of self-analysis focused on one's learning, decision-making, and thinking processes. According to Hall and Simmerall, the intent of providing teachers feedback is to encourage them to reflect on and to critically analyze their work in order to make positive changes. The ultimate goal of focused feedback, according to Marzano, is for teachers to track their progress towards their goals over time. Lee states that when teachers become more critical and reflective of their own teaching practices, they are better equipped to tailor feedback to students' needs. Their beliefs about learning and their personal feedback practices are then embedded in their instruction. While in some cases feedback is used to communicate to students what is right and wrong in their work, in other instances it is a source against which students can evaluate progress, check out their own internal constructions of goals, criteria, and standards. This leads to the research question posed by the study. Do teachers who provide frequent and immediate feedback to students have a more positive attitude towards receiving feedback related to their own practice? Two questions from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development's 2013 Teaching and Learning International Survey, or the TALIS, were selected to provide data for this study. Both selected questions produce qualitative Interval data measured on a Likert scale. Data from the 2013 TALIS International Secondary Teacher Survey was downloaded and imported into the IBM SPSS. Data was modified to account for the responses that were omitted, not reached, or logically not applicable to that person. Missing data was recorded and not included in the final data set. The first selected TALIS question for this study asked teachers, to what extent has feedback received at this school directly led to a positive change in your teaching practices? The response options for the question include no change, small change, moderate change, and large change. I noticed that the majority of the responses fall into the category of seeing a small change or a moderate change in their teaching practices as a result of the feedback that they received themselves. The second question is, how often do you observe students when working on a particular task or provide feedback immediately as a method of assessing students' learning in the classroom? The response options include never or almost never, occasionally, frequently, and in all or nearly all lessons. 78% of the respondents provide immediate feedback frequently or in all or nearly all lessons. An analysis of variance, or ANOVA, test was administered via SPSS. ANOVA was selected to determine whether there is any statistically significant difference between the means of the variables. An analysis was significant with a p-value of less than 0.05. Comparisons indicate that the variation within groups was higher than that between the groups. Though there was a statistically significant relationship between the variables, there is evidence to also suggest that the frequency of teachers to student feedback has little to no impact on whether the teacher values the feedback in their own practice. This finding warrants further research to determine why this might be and what it suggests about teachers' perception of feedback. Future studies might include qualitative measures such as interviews to gain more insight into why teachers do or do not value their own feedback, and that providing feedback to students. Further research might also identify specific constraints that the teachers are experiencing in providing students feedback, as well as their personal interpretation of what constitutes meaningful feedback. The following pages provide references for my research. Thank you for listening to my presentation today.